Today's lecture will be over Chapter 19, Section 4, Objectives. Number 1, identify key events in the history of Central Africa. Number 2, describe how colonization led to economic problems in Central Africa. Number 3, identify changing themes in Central African art. And number 4, examine educational programs in Central Africa. Now, if we go ahead and we start looking at the area that we're talking about, Central Africa, what we notice is that a lot of people look at Africa and they say Africa's a poor country and poor area of the world. And they're kind of right. First of all, Africa as a continent is very large, but what we see is that the northern part of the Sahara Desert makes it so that a lot of those countries are going to be poor. You also look at South Africa and East Africa, you can see some very desert areas, very difficult to live in. But the area that we're looking at right now, if we scan in on the satellite image right here, we're going to see a lot of green areas right here. If you look at this lake right here, this is a freshwater lake called Lake Victoria, and in this area right here, you're going to see the Congo River. So what we should see is we should see a really good area that has got a lot of money because they can have agriculture, they can have irrigation and things like that, when in effect, that's actually not true. Now, the countries that we're looking at specifically: Cameroon, Central African Republic, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, São Tomé, Principe, which is an island off the west coast. And what we see is that in these Central African countries, they're combined by what's called the Bantu migration. What we see is about 2000 BC, the Bantu spread from southeastern Nigeria, and what happens is that land shortage, basically there's not enough land, it starts making them kind of spread their language and spread their culture. What's so important about this is that the migration creates cultural diversity, but it actually links all these countries together by a common language. And so what we see is that the Bantu language, or at least forms of it, are spoken by about 120 million Africans today. And so what we see is that these countries are going to be kind of united and bound together because they speak the same language. Now, the slave trade is something that we've kind of talked quite a bit about. Probably you've talked about this in your other history classes, but the Europeans are going to be wanted slaves for plantations in the Americas. What happens is that Christopher Columbus has sailed west. He's landed in Central America. Spain, thinking that they're going to get a bunch of money, are going to send the conquistadors. And then, of course, what we see is that they don't bring back much gold, but what they do bring back is the opportunity to grow plantations, things like sugar plantations, other types of plantations that bring money to Spain. And so what happens is that again, specifically Spain, what we see is that they're going to go ahead and they're going to basically kill off the Native American population. And when they do that, they need people to work the sugar plantations. This is where they start bringing in the slave plantations and having the slaves work on them. Now, many African rulers sold slaves to other Africans, Arabs, Europeans. One of the misconceptions is that the Europeans oftentimes would go into the inland of Africa, steal a bunch of people, and then go ahead and sell them to the slave trade. Which actually happened was that it was the Africans who were competing with each other. They wanted to trade with the Europeans, so that what the Europeans essentially did was sat inside the port city and waited for the Africans to trade with them. By the end of the slave trade, in 1817, millions of people had been taken to the Americas and Europe. Now, one of the things that I get a common question about is I get people asking, Mr. Beyer, if we would not have had a civil war, would slavery still be around today? And I can answer that with one word: no. And the reason is, and this is where I get that, is that the slave trade during this period of time, the 1850s, 1860s, are starting to see a drastic decline. Most of the European countries had outlawed slavery, and the United States, if you remember from your Civil War history, in North America, or excuse me, in the United States, the northern part, they're going to outlaw it already. So the slave trade is not working out very good. 1870s, it starts to dissipate to a point that it's not profitable anymore. And so if the United States would not have had the Civil War, we probably would have gotten rid of the slave trade. It probably just would have taken a lot longer time. But what you see is that in this area, after the slaves trade is done, people have to figure out what to do to make money. Well, the Europeans had not been going too far inland during this period of time. Belgium's King Leopold II opens up the Congo trade. And what happens is that when he does this in 1884, they hold that Berlin Conference that we talked about in Chapter 19, Section 1. And what's so important about this is that the countries in Europe are basically going to divide up this Africa area, and they don't really care about where they draw the longitude and latitude lines, where they draw the political boundaries. They don't care. What they care about is basically setting it up so that they can trade. And what we see is that yes, it's going to form these different states and different countries, but what we see specifically is that the African countries then are stunted by this growth, because what we see is that they're going to be pitted with each other, and they're going to be pitted with areas that really don't like each other, and that's going to cause a lot of diverse populations, corrupt leaders, and things like that. So again, this forced labor, getting them rubber, palm oil, ivory, and that's going to allow them to sell. So what we see is that the effect of colonialism, like we said, was that essentially it stunted its growth because they're not able to go out there, they're not able to improve their infrastructure. More importantly, they're not able to continue to grow. They're put up in a lot of civil wars, a lot of political corruption, corrupt leaders, and it makes it so that these countries are not able to continue to grow and become better. Now, what we see again with the economic effects, lost resources, their culture is taken away, ethnic oppression of the people. One of the other big problems that we see in Africa during this period of time of the 1800s, little infrastructure, not enough money for transportation and education systems. One of the things that happens in the United States, we follow Great Britain doing this, is that we have the Industrial Revolution around about the 1820s, 1830s. And what happens is that during this time, the United States is changing, because what they're doing is that they are becoming industrialized. They're building the big factories. They're making it so that you can have mass transportation. A lot of countries do this during the 1800s and the early 1900s, but the African countries, they're still kind of backpedaling because of all the problems that have happened because of colonialism. So what happens is that there's going to be a lot of problems in this area. One example of this is going to be the Congo's economic chaos. So Democratic Republic of Congo has gold, copper, and diamonds. You would think that that would be bringing in a lot of money, but it's not necessarily the case. 1967, Mobutu Seko is going to run businesses, use his army to keep power. Now, Kabbalah is going to replace Mobutu in 1997, but he's going to go ahead, he's going to send troops. Angola, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Rwanda, Uganda, they want land and resources, and so they're going to go ahead and they're going to get Kabila assassinated in 2001. His son Joseph takes over, but what you can see is just a constant change of political power, and that's never good. The United States is able to change their leader every 4 or 8 years, but if you think about it, the Congress is able to continue to have the same type of power throughout the entire time. They might go 20, 30 years. It might be 2, 3 years. At the same time, in Africa, we don't see that. We see this change happening over and over and over, and it's a complete overhaul. Now, we also can see the art in Africa, and we can see it as kind of a reflection of their culture. Since independence, many of the countries have banned colonial influence. Basically, they don't like the Western, areas like the United States. They don't like Europe, and so they say that they want to get rid of it, and they want to keep kind of the African countries, again with this Bantu migration, they want to keep the African countries together and doing things their way with their type of culture. They kind of look to recover African personality in their art. Today, artists address political, urban life, social justice, and crime. Now, Pablo Picasso, you probably heard about him. He's going to be influenced by something that's called Fang sculpture. Fang sculpture was kind of in its heyday, was really a status symbol. What it is, wooden mass painted with white, blackened out eyes and figures. You're going to see boxes from ancestral bones, decorative or protective figures. What we see with this is that it's kind of a artistic renditions that are going to have a lot of it based in African culture. Like I said, it used to be kind of a status symbol for people that were really rich to have this Fang sculpture, and now it's kind of faded away a little bit. but we do still have it around. Now, improving education is going to be a major problem in this area. 2001, less than half of the sub-Saharan young adults attend school. There's a shortage of teachers in secondary schools, high dropout rates. There's also language problems. What happens is that different languages are spoken in homes and in schools. And so what we see is that a lot of people are trying to go there and teach these people the English language because of business and things like that, but the people at home and their families don't speak English, and so they want them to speak kind of the African language and the African dialect, and there's some conflict right there. In Cameroon, most children leave school at age 12. Central African Republic, kids 6 to 14 are required to attend school. Cameroon, Gabon, and Republic of Congo are adding higher education, and of course, healthcare education is increasing. Things like AIDS, Ebola virus, cholera are all things that they're looking to improve. This concludes our lecture over Chapter 19, Section 4. Please complete the assessment at this time.